Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on what time of the day you're listening to this. My name is James Thayer, and I'm here with The World's Last Night to continue reading the entire Bible with commentary. Today we're in Genesis chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 1 and kick it off real quick here. So verse 1, Adam knew his wife Eve intimately, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Now, throughout the Bible, you're going to sometimes see this phrase, knew, K-N-E-W, to know someone, and it's used as a euphemism for sex or consummation, but not always. And that is one thing I feel like people get tripped up frequently whenever they're reading and interpreting Scripture. They'll learn one little key way to look at Scripture, and then they replicate that, and they think throughout the rest of Scripture it's going to be that way too. Context is definitely key. I remember one of my theology classes, guy, he basically said that, hey, isn't everything that has to do with feet in the Bible, isn't that a euphemism for sex? And it's true that there are sometimes I'll talk about, laid at the feet or whatever. Sometimes it is, but not everything is. And, an example of this is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. So you have to look at the context surrounding the Scripture. And this one we know absolutely is that they are conceiving a child. So she conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have had a male child with the Lord's help. Then she also gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel became a shepherd of a flock, but Cain cultivated the land. In the course of time, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. So right now we have two brothers. One is deciding, I'm going to be a farmer. The other one's going to be a shepherd. Nothing wrong with that. And I think people get this sort of twisted when they talk about these two offerings. They ask, why is one of them going to be accepted by God and the other one rejected? It has nothing to do with the fact that one of them is produce and one of them is animals. As you get into the Levitical law, you'll see that there are grain offerings as well as animal sacrifices. There are different offerings for different sins or sacrifices for different sins, and everything has its place. It's not necessarily the fact that one is produce and the other one is animal. But notice the difference here, specifically the fact that Cain presents some of the land's produce, whereas later it says Abel presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock. So Abel is very intentional to give the first of his flock to the Lord as an offering. We'll keep reading. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. Cain was furious and he was downcast. If we go to the New Testament in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, we can sort of cross-reference an aspect of Abel's offering that may have set it apart from Cain's. And so we see that it says in verse 4, by faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. So the whole chapter of Hebrews 11 is basically the writer of Hebrews. We don't know who wrote it. We'll get to that later. But the writer of Hebrews is listing off all of these sort of heroes of the faith and why it is that their faith justified them before God. And so the insinuation is basically that Abel's offering in faith to God here. So he might have a right attitude compared to Cain. He's obviously being intentional about giving God the best, the firstborn and their fat portions. And so I think those two things are kind of what's separating the two offerings here. So, okay, Cain's upset, and we get to pick it up in verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you furious, and why are you downcast? If you do right, won't you be accepted? But if you do not do right, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. So God's reasoning with Cain here, he's basically saying, don't be sad. Like, if you change your behavior and you do what's right, you're going to be accepted. You're going to be justified. And I think with the Hebrews verse, we can sort of put that in, if you are offering by faith, and then we know from the Levitical law, the first fruits, your offering is going to be accepted. But God sees the heart of Cain, and Cain's heart is dark because corrupted by sin, right? So he basically says sin's crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. We're going back to, I mentioned previously how in the curse for the woman it was your desire is going to be for your husband. That doesn't mean it wants to help you. It's not for you like pro-Cain. No, the sin wants to make him a slave, make Cain a slave. And so, the Lord is basically saying, no, you gotta master the sin, what's welling up in your heart to do evil, because he knows what Cain's gonna do. Okay, so in the next verse, Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. Cool. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So it didn't take long until humanity had its first murder. We literally had to have the first two people born after humanity got kicked out of the garden. And now Cain is furious, jealous of Abel, and decides, hey, I'm going to kill him. That'll solve my problem, surely. So then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother, Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's guardian? You've probably heard this before, like brother's keeper. Am I my brother's keeper? That's where this comes from. That phrase comes from. Then he said, what have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed with alienation from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed. If you work the land, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. So, go back and remember that Cain had settled down. He had become a farmer, and God is taking away his vocation. He can't be a farmer anymore. He took away a lot of Cain's purpose. And he's basically saying, you're going to be restless and wander on the earth. So Cain answered the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear, since you are banishing me today from the soil, and I must hide myself from your presence. So that's a big one. And become a restless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord replied to him, in that case, whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. And he placed a mark on Cain so that whoever found him would not kill him. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now, it doesn't say Cain lived forever. I think that gets mixed up, too, in popular culture. People thinking that Cain lives forever. No, it just says there's some sort of mark, maybe a birthmark or brandishing, I don't know, that God puts on Cain to let others know that, hey, you can't kill Cain. He's working out his punishment here. So then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So he's estranged from his family. Now, we're going to get to an interesting aspect. It's an argument from silence, basically, but the Bible isn't clear on whether or not God made other people. And I can feel people closing out of their podcast right now because they've grown up to believe this, and I don't think they've ever really questioned it or thought about it. So what I'm about to say, it's not actually heresy. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. I'm just giving a example of a way that this could work out, and it wouldn't contradict Scripture. That's all. So let's just define a contradiction, because it's really important. When people say the Bible's full of contradictions, they're not. Those people don't understand what a contradiction is. Contradiction is this. The pen is blue. And the second statement would be, the pen is not blue. That's a contradiction. But if I were to say the pen is green and then the pen is blue, that's not a contradiction, because part of the pen can be green, part of the pen can be blue. Contextually speaking, it could be somewhere in between those colors, like an aqua and or a teal. And so it really matters. So it's not the Bible doesn't actually have those kinds of contradictions usually, especially whenever you contextualize it. But so basically what I'm saying is God puts this mark on him, and you find out later that these people have their own children. There's a decent chance that God may have made other humans. All we're told about is we get a little snapshot of this one family. There's a decent chance he may have made others. And the Bible's silent on it, so it's a logical fallacy either way, really. Can't say for sure, and you also can't write it off completely. But He's got this mark on him so others don't kill him. Okay, now we're going into the line of Cain. Cain knew his wife intimately, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Then Cain became the builder of a city, and he named the city Enoch after his son. Irad was born to Enoch. Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methuselah, or Methushael. Methushael fathered Lamech. Lamech took 2 wives for himself, one named Ada and the other named Zillah. Okay, so here we got the first instance of polygamy. We're really quickly screwing up humanity here. Lamech takes 2 wives. Now, that's not how it was supposed to be from the beginning. Just a couple chapters earlier, we have Adam, not good to be alone. I'm making Eve. God forms his first marriage between a man and a woman, not a man and 2 women. You will find polygamy all throughout the Old Testament, including people who we admire, such as King David, and Solomon went off the rails. That guy has 300 wives and 700 concubines, and he devolves into paganism. Very interesting. Can't wait to talk about that character down the line when we get to him. But just because the Bible describes something, that doesn't mean it prescribes it. It doesn't mean, just because it shows, Cain killed Abel, it doesn't actually mean that that's a good thing. And just because it shows Lamech takes 2 wives, it's not prescribing that we should take 2 wives. It's just giving a fact, a historic fact. And I think that's really important, especially when we come to the New Testament concerning this one piece, because this one piece was actually used for a long time by the Mormon Church to say that polygamy is okay. But in the New Testament, we have no such thing. In fact, Jesus comes along and he basically reiterates that marriage from the beginning. A man should leave his parents and cling to his wife, right? It's not plural. And even Paul, he talks about marriage all the time, and it's always one man and one woman. And so I would say those are more prescription, especially the beginning in Genesis when God actually forms the first marriage. So just because Lamech, bottom line, just because Lamech or anyone else is polygamous, has multiple wives, that doesn't mean that that's good. And in fact, we're just devolving. It gets worse. The story gets worse for humankind. We'll keep going. Adab or Jabal, he was the father of the nomadic herdsmen. Cool. His brother was named Jubal. He was the father of all who played the lyre and the flute. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain, who made all kinds of bronze and iron tools. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives... Okay, before I get to that, I just want to make it clear that this kind of writing is not what you find in fiction. If you've ever read the Iliad or other ancient, even Epic of Gilgamesh, if you ever read ancient literature for stories, fiction, it's not like this. You don't just throw in little tidbits about these people, that they played the lyre, that they were the father of the nomadic herdsmen. You don't just have endless genealogies like the Bible does. And that's what, for me, definitely helps to at least assert that the writer of these scriptures believed them to be true. They weren't written to be fiction, and they're not written like fiction. The intention to make it fiction wasn't there. And to me, it adds credibility to that these were real people. We'll keep going. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, pay attention to my words, for I killed a man for wounding me, a boy for striking me. If Cain is to be avenged 7 times over, then for Lamech it will be 77 times. Sounds like he's worried about his past sins. And he's murdered a bunch of people, and he's worried that, wrath is going to come back on him a lot, because if wrath came on Cain, it's going to come back on him also. Now we're flipping back to Adam. Adam knew his wife intimately again. She gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has given me another child in place of Abel. So Abel's been replaced by Seth since Cain killed him. A son was born to Seth also, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So that's cool. I think here's an interesting thing that C.S. Lewis said, and this is the end of the chapter. I think C.S. Lewis basically said in The Problem of Pain that the Lord screams at us in our pain. It's a megaphone to rouse a deaf ear. He basically talks about how pain is actually used to point us back to God. And I think that I find in myself frequently, and I'm sure you do too, you go to God whenever you're in trouble. And something I've been trying to break in myself is only going to God when I'm in trouble. So whenever I'm prosperous, when my business is doing well, and my family's healthy, I'm trying to reflect on that more, thank God for it more frequently. So I'm not just having a relationship with my God whenever I have issues. No one likes that kind of person. No one likes the person that only shows intimate relationship, like wanting to get to know you whenever they need something from you. Rather, I'm trying to acknowledge that all good things come from God, and as such, whenever I'm prosperous and not in pain, I still should acknowledge God in Him prospering me, and not just go to Him whenever I think I need help. But at the end here, we see that at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. I think that is because things started getting so bad so quickly. You had someone murder, you had Cain murder his brother, then you had, is that fratricide? I'll have to look that one up. But then you had one of his descendants, Lamech. He's got 2 wives, and then he's murdered 2 people, and he's worried about what's going to happen to him. And so these people are starting to call on the name of the Lord. Why? Because without God, society really breaks down, and it breaks down fast. So the next chapter we're going to look at is the line of Seth, and it's going to be sort of boring, not going to lie. You're going to have some of these chapters in the Bible where it's mostly genealogies. The cool thing about the next chapter, though, we get to see some people who live very old, and we get to talk about Methuselah and Enoch, who are 2 pretty cool characters. There's some good factoids revolving around them. So that's it for today's recording of The World's Last Night. I hope to do an interview soon or a unique historic factoid soon, a whole episode on them. I think that'd be very interesting, and I can't wait to put them out there. So tune in next time. Thanks so much.